So the recording is going to be emailed to you. It's also going to be on YouTube. So if you miss anything or if your Wi-Fi drops out, don't worry, everything is going to be recorded and the slides will be shared with you after this event. So don't worry about missing anything or if you have to go soon, because I know we're all from different time zones here. We have a very packed workshop for you today. So I'm just gonna quickly get started with the introduction. And then we can go right into the workshop by our amazing speaker. So let me share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, perfect. So hopefully you know a little bit about entry level already. We help you learn and get experience so you can get hired. Some of our courses do include coding courses like this Python course and the front end web dev course, but the web dev is more for beginners because we don't actually use code, we use Webflow. But Python is a bit of what we're covering today too. Some rules before you start, please don't spam the chat with unrelated information. If you have questions about the contents of this workshop, feel free to put it in the chat, but otherwise, just keep it relevant to the workshop topic. I also want to know what level you're at, so the speaker, Ahmed, can better maybe like tailor the workshop or like the questions to your level. So maybe put in the chat if you're 1, a complete beginner, 2, if you've taken a few courses, 3, you landed an internship, or 4, you're currently working in tech. Okay, we have some people who are complete beginners. I think, Ahmed, your workshop is pretty beginner friendly. So
yeah, I would say.
Yeah, so it's perfect for everyone here. Okay, so some people have taken a few courses. Okay, awesome. I assume the courses were coding related courses, but it's interesting to see everyone here is pretty beginner because that's who this workshop is for. All right, thanks for sharing. All right, a little bit more about us. At entry level, we want to reskill 1 billion people by 2030. We want to help you land jobs, especially jobs in tech that you'll love. So by being here, you're helping us with our mission. Here are all of our available courses. You can find more details at entrylevel.net. And I'll share the link to that later and also via email. If you take a course by us, you'll get a certificate like this, a portfolio project, because all of our courses are project-based. Like I tried to learn coding before. I was just telling Ahmed earlier, I tried to learn coding and it's so hard to learn without a project. So entry-level courses all have projects. And you also get access to a Discord community where you can get feedback on your work. Okay, so that's about entry level. I'm going to pass it off to our wonderful speaker, Ahmed, now to introduce himself and start the workshop.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen for my slides. That's fine. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the workshop. Thank you, Jennifer, for the opportunity. Basically, I'm going to be talking about like a framework for learning programming languages. This talk is pretty beginner friendly, but also like if you have some sort of experience, you would know that you need to learn different programming languages while you go across in your career. So being able to quickly pick up a new programming language and being able to work with it is a huge skill in software engineering, basically. So hopefully you'll be able to get 1 or 2 ideas from this talk, and hopefully I'll also be able to learn from the interaction in this talk as well. So basically, my name is Ahmed Adebisi. I'm a software.
Your screen share disappeared. Are you able to reshare again?
Oh, okay. Give me a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Ahmed Adebisi. I'm a software engineer, but I've been primarily working as a front-end engineer for a couple of years now. So the front-end engineering part means I get to work mostly on the UI part. and that's where I find more fulfilling, basically. So I've previously worked at Number. It's popularly known as Kudi in Nigeria. It's a fintech company, and yeah, I worked there for about a year before I moved on to where I am currently, which is Catalog in London. Yeah, so Catalog basically deals with how you work as a team in your company. We are also doing some stuff with AI. So like we have pretty cool stuff going on currently. So you can check out the website on catalog.com. Here's also my website, adebisiahmed.dev, to get more information about me. So here are some of the things I like to work on, basically web and mobile animations, micro interactions, algorithms. More recently, I've been learning Golang as well. So that's where sort of like the inspiration for this talk came from, because I'm learning a new language and I'm sort of like looking for a structure to learn it better. I also love watching and playing football. If you know what this emoji means, the club I support, please comment down in the chat. I would love to know your guess. Yeah, so if you want to learn like a new programming language, just like learning any other thing in life, I think the most important thing to do is to set a goal. And the goals can come in different shapes and sizes or whatever it is. So far you identify what your goal is, that will drive your passion for learning and you'll most likely succeed at it, right? So I have like a couple of points on what your goals could be. It could be personal to you. It might not be on this slide as well. But so far you're able to identify what the goal is, I think you'll be able to do well in your journey to learning. So first off is if you want to build a specific app, so you might want to build an Android app, then you will need to use a language such as Java or Kotlin. If you want to build an iOS app, you might need to learn Swift UI Swift UI basically. If you want to do front end, you might need to learn JavaScript, React, Vue, and such frameworks like that. If you want to do backend, you might need to learn Python or Golang. So depending on like the kind of projects you want to build, you can also like focus on the language to learn. Also, depending on like if you've had experience with other programming languages, let's say you have experience with OOP languages like Java or C#, and you want to look at other paradigms or other ways of thinking in other programming languages, then you might consider learning something like maybe Haskell, which deals more with like functional programming. That could also be like your goal for learning. It could also be for new opportunities, getting a job. So if you want to apply for a particular job and the job description has a particular language, right, then that can like prepare you to learn that particular language. Or if you want to do open source, you generally have to learn like different languages and different frameworks to contribute to open source. So that could also be a driver as well. Also, pivoting to different areas in tech, right? You might be in front-end engineering currently, or you want to focus and shift gear to back-end engineering, then you probably need to learn back-end engineering focused languages like probably Ruby, C# and the likes. Also, to be a generalist, right? If you want to be a software engineer and you want to continue excelling in that field, it's a field where you have to continuously learn, right? So you probably start learning a language now and you have to pick up another language to work on other projects. So if you're able to gather the experience from working in different languages, you will be able to work on different problems, right, in different spaces, and you have a wealth of knowledge about those languages to be able to contribute effectively. Once you have your goals nailed down, then you want to move on to the basics of the language. When you look at like all programming languages, they do have some commonalities, basically, in the sense that they have variables where you need to store data. They have if-else condition, right? They have switch case. If you've ever taken any programming course, you will know what I'm talking about. They have functions. So basically, if you are able to nail down those basics, you'll be able to progress quite quickly. And some of these basics, let's look at data types, for example. Like all programming languages have data types they support. Again, each of them have like variations and differences in the sense that you have integers here. You might want to store integer values. You might want to store Boolean values. Boolean values, for example, are true or false values. Strings are like, for example, my name, right? Floats are like decimal point values. Doubles and longs like that are also like larger values of integers. So each programming languages have their own data types and support them in different versions, right? Some might have basically ints and floats. Some might combine ints, floats, longs, and doubles, and the likes. Another thing most of them have is variables. Variables are like containers for storing data, right? You store them basically so that you can reuse them all throughout your application, right? You can also modify them in some way, shape, or form, right? So here in my slide, you see me writing like snippets of code in different languages. This is because like the talk is meant to be general across different languages, right? So here in Golang, I'm basically declaring a variable called name, and I'm storing the value of Mark, right? In Golang, it is statically typed, so you need to tell the compiler what sort of variable it is. Is it an integer? Is it a string? Is it a float or a double? In this case, it is a string. Similar code in Python looks like this, but you don't need to use a keyword for the variable, and you don't need to specify the data type, basically. So depending on the language you're learning, you still need to store variables, values, and they can be declared in different syntax, basically. Also, what's common is like control flow, right? So you typically have like your if-else kind of statements, right? So essentially, how does a programming language work, right? It executes statements sequentially, like the first line, second line, third line, and the likes. But in some cases, based on some condition, I want to perform an action, while in other reverse, I want to perform another action. For example, in this case, I'm saying, okay, if my age is above 18, right? In this case, the age is 20, then I can say, oh, I'm an adult. If not, then I'm not. So like the flow of the program is sort of like broken in the sense that you are not going directly one line at a time again, but based on the condition, you can perform an action or not. You also have loops. They can be written in form of for loops or while loops, right? They are used to perform repetitive jobs or to execute repetitive statements, basically. So let's say I want to print a value between 1 and 100. It wouldn't make sense to write the print function and print 1, print function and print 2, print function and print 3. So basically, it is not efficient in that regard. So what I can do is write a loop that continuously executes whatever the variable holds, in the sense that I can loop from maybe 1 to 100 and then just print out the exact variable value. Also, you have switch statements, which are similar to like if else kind of statements, but they can have several cases in which you would like to execute. Another common thing is functions. Functions are basically used to store like a group of code that go together. Right? So in this case, I have an add function, right? So you give it 2 values and then it adds this up for you, right? This is sort of like a simple contrived example, but like if you know that you have a group of code that need to go together, you can basically store them in a function, right? And functions can typically return values or they might not return values. So these are like the basics you need to learn in any different programming language, and they are sort of like common across each of those languages. So what you want to do when learning is to nail down these basics. When you have done that, then you can proceed to other much more advanced topics. So another thing you need to learn in the language of your choosing are collections. So collections are basically, they store data types that like of similar values. So what do I mean by that? If I need to record students in my class, right? They are sort of like a group of students that are particular to my own class. So they are like a collection, right? I can't sort of like separate one student from the other. They are like together in that particular class. So if I need to store a group of data, then I will start considering using a collection, right? So the collections would typically range, right? Like differ from each other. So let's look at some of them. The first one is sets. Sets are typically used to store unique values, right? So if I want to store, this might not be the best example. Let me see. If I want to store the names of my students in my class, right? So I think if I'm getting like maybe like the 3 names of those statements, that should be unique enough to identify each of the students in the class, right? So basically, in a set, if you had similar values, it only holds like the unique values there. So operations that we can perform on a set are basically to add values or to remove values. We can also look at this particular code is in Python. This is in Java, so yeah. So lists are basically used to hold list of data, right? They don't necessarily have to be unique, right? And basically how they differ from arrays is that they can store as large values as possible. So you don't need to set a limit on the amount of data you can store. Yeah, so operations that you can perform there, you can add items there. You can get a particular value at an index. You can set a particular value at an index. You can remove an item from the list, and you can also clear the list. Another one is dictionaries or maps, right? So if you need to store like a key value pair, so an example of a key value pair is looking at this example. We have class scores, right? So you can have names of students and you want to associate the scores they got in a particular exam. So this is a perfect example of when you should or you would need to use a dictionary, right? So you are storing one data and relating it to another data, right? So in this case, I'm storing the names to the scores and values like that. And remember, they are a collection in the sense that I'm not storing just one item, you're storing like multiple values. Another one is queues, right? Queues, imagine queues are sort of like everyday queues, right? So you want to go buy, get something in a mall, you would typically, maybe this is contrived, like I said, you queue, right? And it's sort of like you get served in a first come, first serve kind of manner, right? So the first person to come gets to be attended to first. and the last person to come will get attended to last. So if you need a collection where you need to process data that comes first and the data that comes last will be processed last, that is a perfect example of when to use a queue, right? So operations that you can perform there, you can pop left, that is remove an item from the front of the queue. You can append, that is you add an item to the end of the queue. And you can also access the elements in front using an index in this case, if you are using Python. So this is an example in Python. Another collection to look at are stacks. So imagine a stack of book that you have, and typically you are currently reading a book. So you want to keep the book that you are currently reading at the top of the stack so that whenever you go to it, you can easily access it, right? So it's always at the top of the stack. But once you are done reading it, then it goes down the pecking order until you have a book that you're currently reading, you can read, return it, go back to it until you are done again. So imagine the way stack work in that manner. And if you need to store your data in that kind of manner and manipulate it such that the last item will be the first to be looked at, then you can consider a stack. Another collection is priority queues, or they are also known as heaps. So in this case, priority is assigned to items in the group or in the list, right? So items with the highest priority gets served or gets basically gets the highest priority in the sense that they get service first. So if you have different items, no matter if you come first, second, or third, if you have the highest priority, you would always get the preference, basically. So basically, once you learn the basics and you also learn how to store collections, one thing to also look at is how to store complex types. So if you are going to build like any complex application, you would need to store something that represents maybe an entity. In this case, let's say a user, right? A user will typically not have just one information, but they will have like multiple information associated to that user. In that sense, maybe like their name, their surname, their age, and the likes. So you need to know how to store like complex data. So in different programming languages, some use structs, right? Some use classes. So in this example, you see that I'm storing the name and also the age, similar to classes here where I'm storing the name as well as the age. So here it's in Golang, here it's in Python. And basically the difference between structs and classes is just where they are stored in memory. They can just be used to store group of data as well. So they are pretty similar. So another thing to watch out for is copy by value versus copy by reference, right? So the best way to do this is to go through an example, right? So in this case, I am storing the value of 10 in this variable X. I'm storing the value of 20 in this variable Y. So I'm making a copy, right, of this value in X into A. So basically copying 10 from X to A. And here I'm copying the value of 20 from Y into B here as well. So if I were to print out the values of these four variables, I would see that my X and my A have the same value, right? Because obviously I copied the value from X to A, so they should both have values of 10 and 10. For Y and B, they should both have the value of 20 and 20. Then what happens when I modify one of the variables in which I copied from, right? So if I modify X in this case, which was 10 previously, and now it is 5, then what happens to A, which had a copy from X? Well, it got a copy from X, and basically, if I'm changing the value of X or Y, it shouldn't affect the values of A and B. This is how copy by value works, in the sense that it duplicates the value and then puts it into the variable, the new variable that you declared. The other one is copy by reference, right? So let's look at an example here, right? So I have a user object which stores first name and last name. And I also have an admin object. So basically, this user is an admin, right? So I create a variable here, which is admin, and I try to reference this same user, right? What happens when I modify the first name of the admin, Matt? Well, in this case, if you print out both admin and user, they both print out the same values. Why? Well, for this case where you have objects instead of primitive values such as integers, booleans, strings, and values like that, they store references to memory and not the duplicate of the value. So the user points to the same spot in memory and the admin points to the same spot in memory. So whenever you modify any of these variables, the admin or the user, the other gets the same reference. That means they get the same value as well. So any modification to this will also affect the other. Why is this important with copy by value or copy by reference? The reason why it is important is that you will get to pass values around while programming between variables, functions, and the likes. So if sometimes the causes of bugs are in the sense that, like, if you copy values around, you don't know that another programmer or another place, it can be modified. So once you modify the value, it can cause all sorts of bugs. So knowing when copy by value works and knowing when copy by reference works can reduce the number of bugs and can face in your program. So in this case, if you wanted the variables to be separate without referencing each other, what you would do is to create a copy of this initial variable, and then once you modify it, they wouldn't have the same value again. So yeah, after learning the basics, learning collections, and also learning how to store complex types, right? And learning copy by value and copy by reference, you want to learn language-specific concepts, right? Initially, we've learned concepts that are like closely related to like all programming languages. Now you want to learn concepts that are like tailored to the specific language that you're learning. So an example in Golang is Go routines, right? So basically, when you are executing your program, they sort of like executes on like the same thread, right, of execution. But sometimes if you need to perform an action, like let's say you wanted to read data from the disk, obviously the control will be passed from your program to your operating system and your program will be left idle. What Golang allows you to do is to create several threads, right, that can execute different portions of your code, and you can basically optimize the efficiency of your programs. So why should you learn like Go routines when learning Golang? Because it will help you write better Go programs. Such concepts are not necessarily in all other programming languages, but they are currently in Golang. And once you leverage it, you can write better programs in that specific language, which is Golang. Another example is in Python, where you can write comprehensions. So these two portions of code are similar, right? So traditionally, you would, if you wanted to get like squares of numbers from 1 to 10, you would need to look through the number and then do a square of these numbers and then store it, like append it into the list here. But what you can also do is write it in one line, right? They call it like the Pythonic way, like it is tailored to Python basically. So imagine how much you have reduced these 3 lines of code into this 1 line of code because you know the specific concepts in that language. Another one here, example I have here is in Rust, where you can do pattern matching basically. So if you wanted to match a variable value, let's say X here, and let's say you wanted to match it, if X had a value of either 0 or 1, you can perform an action. In this case, we are returning a string, not many. If you wanted to match values between a range, in this case 2 to 9, we want to return a few. Similarly here as well. So this is specific to Rust and some other languages, but not necessarily present in other languages. So you need to leverage those specific concepts in those languages as well. So moving on to more general or more advanced concepts, typically when you're learning how to program, you typically do an hello world application, right? So you need to know how to read from your console and also write to your console. So an example is printing an hello world to your console. So another thing to learn how to do is to read files. If you are building large enterprise applications, you would need to talk to different programs, basically. And the way they communicate is through something called an API, application programming interface, right? And they sort of like use this data format called JSON, or some use XML and the likes. So learning how to read and write files in that specific format where you can communicate with other programs to solve a particular problem is very, very crucial. You can also, this is more advanced, learn generics. So remember where I had an example for a function called add. So imagine I wanted to, my language allowed me the data types for ints, doubles, and floats. And I needed to add 2 values that were both integers. Of course, I can write a function for that to add 2 values and take in integer values. What if I wanted to add 2 double values, right? Well, I will duplicate the add function and take in 2 double values and then add them together. Well, there is a simpler way to solve that problem. It's called generics, right? Take in 2 values, be able to add them together and put a constraint on those values in the sense that you should be able to pass in integers, doubles, and floats. But basically, I'm writing this same particular code to do all those functions I would have duplicated. Another important thing might be to learn how to make HTTP requests. So you need to, if you're building large applications, you need to talk to other programs, and the way you communicate is through making HTTP requests, like GET requests to get some data, POST to send some data, and the like. So learning how to do those things are also quite important. Also, you need to learn how to parse strings. So sometimes when you are collecting data from your users, you collect them as a bunch, right? In the sense that if I'm making like a console application and I want to collect the name of my user, so I'll typically collect it as one line, the first name, space, the second name. But I need to store those names separately. That's where string parsing sort of like comes in. So I would need to split the string by space and store like the first name in one variable and then store the last name in another variable. So learning how to parse strings is quite crucial as well. So error handling is also quite important. You don't want to leave your users to not know what's going on in your program, basically, when they run into an error. So let's give an example of, let's say you're building a calculator program, right? And you are taking in two values and then you want to divide them. But mathematically, you cannot divide a number by 0, right? It's undefined. But if you leave your program to crash, right, without handling that specific use case, then the user is going to wonder what's going on here, and they might not use your application again. So learning those scenarios where you need to handle errors, right, and give the user like a message in a friendly manner is very, very crucial as well. So let's look at some non-language specific tips that can help you learn better. So when learning a language, the best thing you can do is to pace yourself, right? Try as much as possible not to learn all of the concepts at once. So that might be confusing, especially if you're a beginner, right? Try to pace yourself and try to do exercises at the end of a milestone. So the example of a milestone could be if I've been able to learn the basics. So let's say the basics cover variables, working with if-else statements, working with loops, working with functions. So then I'm able to like write a program that, let's say, basically randomly guesses your age or something like that, something simple that combines all of those elements that you've learned, right? See, simple enough, but not advanced enough to discourage you from learning. So learning an exercise that majorly covers what you have covered so far is important. Then going from them, when you learn more advanced concepts, you can learn like you can start working on more advanced exercises or projects. Also, one thing I've also like kind of picked up is to keep the documentation for the language you're learning on your phone, so that you can sort of like redirect some of the time you spend on social media, right, to reading the docs on your phone. So I know that we spend a lot of time on our phones, right? But sometimes we sort of like wander off, and such time can be put to more productive use. So if you put the docs on your phone, you can easily look at some function or whatever code you need to look at and learn more about this specific language. So one thing you can also do is to practice problem solving in the specific language you're learning. I know we are talking about learning different programming languages, but also programming or software engineering is more so about problem solving, right? So building your ability to solve problems while learning the specific language you are building is also quite crucial. So it's not enough to learn a specific programming language without necessarily also knowing how to solve problems as well. So you can check out platforms like Advent of Code or LeetCode, to mention a few. Advent of Code is more is like friendlier compared to is more friendly compared to LeetCode. So you might consider choosing Advent of Code, basically. One thing you should also do is to look up other people's solutions. So while learning, there's a high probability that the first code or the first solution you come up with might not be the best. So learning how other people are also solving the same problem you are trying to solve can help you quickly level up in the language you are building. There are people that have been probably using the language you are just learning for 5 years, 10 years. So they have more experience than you do. So knowing when to like look up other people's solution and when to apply them is also like very, very crucial to learning. Also, you need to stay up to date with changes in the language. So you can check out some GitHub issues or proposals, blogs that you follow about your favorite language or frameworks, and videos about the language as well can help you quickly level up on updates made to such languages. Also, don't be satisfied with the first solution you come up with. Always think of how to improve the solutions you come up with. And don't forget to use search engines like Google and other platforms. In this case, if you're doing Advent of Code or LeetCode, there are people that publish their solutions there on those platforms, and you can sort of like look at those solutions and learn better as well. Also, try to embrace project-based learning. It's easy to fall into a loop of doing tutorials all along without building projects. What building projects does is to solidify your knowledge and also expose your knowledge gaps, right? So if you're building a much more complex project, there's a high probability that you come in contact with things you have not done in that language before, or things you don't necessarily know how to do. Then that's when you sort of like Google around and check and see how to solve these problems. So that next time when you're doing another problem, right, or that has those kind of elements in which you have learned before, you can easily apply those concepts. Build projects that are personal to you. I think one thing people don't really do much of is to build things they like or to try to solve problems that are personal to them. I think if you try to solve problems that are personal to you, there's a high probability that you would be more passionate about it and more dedicated about it, and you'll be able to excel, right? And be able to see the project through, not like just picking up any random project without any motivation, and it's easy to lose steam and just give up. Also, one thing you can do is to rebuild projects that you've worked on before in other languages that you're learning. So let's say I've built some projects in Python before, but maybe not many project ideas come to your mind. You can easily just pick up projects I've built before, right? But like building it in this specific language that you are learning currently, it can easily help you level up as well. Yeah, I think that's the end of the talk. So here are some of like the references and resources. So you might want to look up these app ideas, which gives you like different ideas on projects you can work on while learning, and it can help you really level up quickly. If you have any questions, please put those questions in the chat and I'll be able to answer them. Also, if you want to connect with me, you can scan the QR code. So I can leave this on for now. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Ahmed. That was so enlightening because I feel like you shared things that I didn't even know existed. So now I have a direction. But for people who are a little bit overwhelmed right now as a beginner, where do you recommend they start learning?
Yeah, so I think, like I said before, the first thing to do is to identify your goal, right? I wouldn't want you to start learning Golang when you want to build Android apps. It doesn't make much sense, right? So figure out what you want to build or what you're passionate about. Let's also say that, you haven't figured out what you want to build yet. What you can also do in that sense is to explore different languages and learn more about different fields as well. So the more you try to learn about different things you can do, the better exposed you are, right? So after doing that, you can begin to look up like friendlier websites like Code Academy, or like you said, entry level, free code camp as well. So they are more beginner friendly, and they are well paced, where you can learn and you can pace yourself, and they have communities as well, which can help you quickly level up, and you can find like minds who will also encourage you while learning.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing. I think working backwards from the job you want, like you said, going for Android doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
I think if people looked at the job descriptions and they looked at the requirements, looked at what the company wants, then work backwards from there would be best. It's like
Yeah,
reverse
exactly.
engineering your career.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you are interested in a particular company or a particular job, then look up the requirements for the job. Basically, you see a ton of requirements listed, then you can pick up those languages or those frameworks and start learning them and start leveling up, so that even when you get through the interview stages, you are not just starting out, right? You already have the base knowledge, and it can even help you during the interview stage as well.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds great. We also had another question here about what project can you use the various languages for, but I think it depends on what projects and jobs you want, like we said, right?
Yeah, so let me go back to slide. So I have here this repository called Hub Ideas. I mean, it sort of like has a ton of projects, right? And basically you can look up the kind of programs you want to build. If you want to build an Android app, you might think of like a small or simple game that you might want to build, right? Maybe a simple social app you might want to build as well. It doesn't have to be something grand. It can be something simple that you can start with and then learn from there. So if you are able to like just look through these projects and then see whatever interests you in whatever platform you are trying to build, maybe Android, front-end apps, web-based applications, mobile applications, iOS applications, then you can build those things. And then the more projects you are able to build, the more experience you have, the better your portfolio as well when applying for jobs.
Perfect. I'm gonna copy paste all these resources and it'll be
Yeah.
emailed to everybody, and it'll also be on our website along with Ahmed's contact information if you're unable to scan this QR code here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat, but I just want to say we're doing a promotion at entry level right now. There's a coupon code for 10% off a course, including our coding courses, but it expires October 11th. So I'm going to put the code in the chat and then you can redeem it at entrylevel.net. It's ELVT 100123. That's like for today's date. But it doesn't look like we have too many questions left. So I think that'll be all for today. Thank you so much, Ahmed. This was really informative. I'm going to be sharing your slides and website contact information and stuff with people via email. And it'll also be on our website, which I'll send to everyone later. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.